For over half a century, humans have endeavored to make business a force for good. But is the movement working? Or is it time to explore a new path forward? Welcome to Less Talk, More Action. We are your hosts, Joel Caesar and Owen Barrett, experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. In each episode, we ask provocative questions and share stories from the front lines of sustainability with leaders in science, tech, and business taking real action to design a cleaner, better future. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to the Less Talk, More Action podcast. My name is Joel Caesar, the world's undisputed voice of building decarbonization. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the world-renowned multifamily solar expert. Today's guest, Ben Christensen, founder and CEO of Cambium Carbon, a company redefining how cities and communities think about waste and climate solutions. So, man, Ben was a cool guy to have. It's a company I've been following for a long time. In my Google days, we work with them, and man, they seem to have taken off from then with this very cool business model of taking wood that otherwise would be discarded and making great products out of them. What do you think?
Yeah, I love having entrepreneurs on the show who come tell us about an idea that after they explain it seems so obvious, but there's nobody else doing it.
Yeah, totally. And he had a cool entrepreneurial journey, like a lot of the other guests we've talked to, like not a direct path. And the idea they initially started with to where they got to doesn't seem to have a lot of dots connected. But when you look at it from a retroactive perspective, it does all come together, as I think resonated with you, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's easy to see how the dots are connected in hindsight.
But you got to just get started. So with that as a segue, before we get into the conversation with Ben, let's dive into a segment we're calling, let's call it Climate Entrepreneurship Lessons from Joel and Owen. And I was kind of inspired by Ben in this episode, and I think it's something that you're going to tell stories around this concept of creating a company, a product, a solution that doesn't really have competition. So, there's lots of ways you can approach being an entrepreneur, and oftentimes it's people that see a problem in their job or in their field that is unsolved. But if that's happening, there's usually many other people thinking about the same challenge and trying to create companies, and then you create this competitive landscape. And it seems, Ben, maybe you might qualify this, but what we learned about Cambium is like they don't really have competition. There's no scaled timber sourcing solution that's trying to divert what otherwise would be waste, discarded wood, and turn that into products, including even structural products like mass timber. And so I think you even asked him on the show, like, well, who's your competition? And then he starts to talk about, well, there's the legacy industries. And, we've explored this idea before on the show, how why don't legacy industries just do the thing that's going to be disruptive and innovative? It's because they can't. They don't. That's why you need to disrupt them. So I thought it was interesting, and I think, again, I'd love to hear your perspective on how you think about this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. There's a book about it called Blue Ocean Strategy that's all about this, just developing a business model or a product sort of in your own market so that you don't have to deal with a crowded space and competition. I feel like the best way to come up with these businesses are by experiencing the problem firsthand and then doing some research about, is there a solution out there? If you have that personality trait or the problem is big enough, it's going to lead you to wonder, like, well, what if I started the solution? And I think that's kind of how Ben got to where he is. That's definitely how I got to where I am. But you got to be curious, and you got to, be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, because if it was easy, there'd be a lot of people doing it already. But I agree with you. I think if you're going to start a business, you should look for a place where there's little to no competition, because then you can really kind of mold the market.
Yeah, cool. What was the name of that book?
Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yeah, we'll have to add it to the Let's Talk More Action book club. But I know Peter Thiel. I looked it up because as we were talking about this, I remembered a quote of his. He says, "Competition is for losers." And, there's a few angles at which he's approaching it, but he suggests that founders should create unique, valuable businesses that dominate their niche rather than getting caught in a race to the bottom with rivals. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds obvious when he says it, or maybe when the book describes it, but it's not easy to find that niche. And oftentimes people see a niche and then get kind of wrapped around the idea, oh, is that niche big enough? What's the total addressable market? But I think we've heard another lesson a few times here is that the riches can be found in niches, right?
Yeah. I was just listening to another podcast the other day that was talking about how, it's such a core exercise of an entrepreneur, especially if you're trying to raise money, to try and estimate your total addressable market.
Yeah.
And it's important, and it is how you raise money, and everybody wants to see a massive market. But what nobody really understands until it's happening to you is that if you do something well, you can grow your market. You can cause the market to expand. And that's super hard to try and calculate on the front end. So I would advise the whole total addressable market thing is such a retarded exercise for venture capitalists. It's so stupid. I would advise that nobody gets scared out of starting a business because they're told that their total addressable market is too small.
Yeah.
That's the worst reason to not try and start a company.
Yeah. And it's an inspiring lesson that we learned from Ben. And I think your business model is similar, just taking on a market where you look at it as someone who, as you have told this story a lot, been staring at this problem for years. Multifamily solar, split incentive. Why isn't anyone doing this? Why can't it be figured out? And you just dove at it. Whereas lots of others probably said, well, that's a too tiny of a niche. I'm not going to bother over there. So it's a great lesson.
Talking to other solar companies, they're like, nah, I'd rather just stick in the resi space. It's all right, man. Good luck.
More for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool stuff. And I think I've mentioned this before to you. I'm really starting to get inspired by the idea of making this show almost how I built this for climate tech founders. There's cool stuff we bring on. I know we've had some professors and policy experts and practitioners, and of course we love all of them, and probably in the short term we'll continue to invite those. But I just love these climate tech, or even we're going to expand beyond climate tech, prop tech, whatever you want to call it, founders and their stories and how they get to where they go, and how challenging it was, but then the ultimate prize of looking back and seeing how these dots connect. It's the best part of these stories.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those stories are some of the things that people like to listen to the most, aside from us just bickering about who knows more in the sustainability space.
Yeah, for sure. People taking action out there. Well, that is a great segue into a very cool episode we have with Ben Christensen. So let's dive into it. Joining us today is Ben Christensen, founder and CEO of Cambium Carbon, a company redefining how cities and communities think about waste and climate solutions. Under Ben's leadership, Cambium Carbon has built a national network that transforms fallen urban trees into carbon-smart lumber and reinvests in local tree planting. Recognized as one of Forbes 30 Under 30 in social impact, Ben brings a track record of entrepreneurial success, climate innovation, and systems-level thinking to one of the most pressing challenges of our time, building a circular economy for carbon. So, Ben, welcome to the Let's Talk More Action podcast.
Heck yeah. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a really exciting company, a company I've known for a long time, which I'm sure we'll get into. But we like to get right to work here, Ben, and we start all our guests with the same question. How are you taking action to make the world a better place?
Yeah. So one of my core sort of shaking a stick at the climate movement theses is that so often we spend so much time evaluating what we need to do, which is important and critical, but more and more I think that the climate problem is an execution one. So part of why I started it, part of what I love about your focus and this podcast focus is it's about how do we take, if there's 10 people working on climate, instead of having 8 of them measuring what we're doing and 2 of them doing it, to have 8 of them doing it and 2 of them measuring how effective it is. And so I think that's a fundamental, ratio that we need to change within the movement. For us, we're all about creating a circular economy around wood and doing that in a way that is really scalable. What that means is it means salvaging wasted material. So wood that's coming after storms like hurricanes, out of our cities when trees die, and then also from things like fires and fuel load reduction, and connecting that material in a place where it's actually reused. Today, most of that wood will be wasted. Instead, it can be turned into durable products like mass timber, or furniture or millwork for different buildings. And our whole goal is to do that in a way that really builds technology. And part of what we've learned and really believe in is if you do that, and if you can create real value in the wood and forest products economy generally, you can both scale a circular material as well as start to improve sustainability for traditional materials and really change how people see and spec wood today. So that's what we do. Team's about 50, been growing a ton, and super excited to get into it.
So Ben, that's awesome, by the way. And so often I feel like we have people on here that say things that sound so obvious, you're surprised it's not happening more. The alternative to what you guys are doing is cutting down trees to create lumber. Is that fair?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way to think about it is essentially two alternatives if we don't exist. It's really wasting a lot of material. So that wood that comes down in a city park or falls down in a storm just ends up getting chipped from a carbon perspective, lots of that off gases. It's really inefficient the way we use that. Then the alternative is also, having, traditional forestry practices. To be super clear, the way I think about it, traditional forestry is really important. Cutting down trees, using our natural resources, is something we deeply believe in. And the way I think about it is there's kind of a gradient. As with everything, there's a gradient. There's some ways in which traditional forestry is really destructive, contributing to deforestation, done really poorly, clear cutting. There's lots of sort of practices there that are really bad. And there's kind of a bottom 25% of forestry that is like really negative. And then if you look at salvaging wood and the impacts and the community benefits, it's kind of like the top 25%. It's like the best possible thing you could do. So our goal ultimately is to essentially move the whole sector up. So to get rid of the worst 25%, where you have these really deleterious systems where you're cutting down trees when you shouldn't, where you're really damaging forests and damaging communities, and replace that with the reuse circular economy. But we really support and work with lots of folks in the traditional space. There's lots of great ways you can do, harvesting forestry. And so that's also a big part of it. So we really want to shift that whole bar in the industry forward.
So Ben, you and I know each other a little bit. I know the company. When I was at Google, we were huge fans of what you all were doing and trying to incorporate your products in as much of our real estate as we could. So always been a fan. We're excited to have you on the show. So I know a little bit about the backstory, but on this show, we're as interested in the climate solution, the technology, the company, what you're actually doing, and we'll get into all that hopefully. But we're as interested in like the entrepreneurial journey. So why this? How did you get into it? Tell us a little story about starting the company.
Yeah, I mean, a couple different sort of threads. I always think it's funny, you read a memoir of some famous successful entrepreneur and it's like, wow, the dots in their life connect so clearly. And it's like, wow, of course, these things ultimately led to where they were. Living it out, I think it's often a lot less clear on where you are and where exactly, the next stone is going to lead so you actually cross the river. And certainly it's true for me, but a few key threads. One, I grew up in wood. So my dad was a construction work carpenter. We, lived in a house in rural New Mexico where we had to cut firewood every summer and we built all of our furniture and we, just worked in that space. And then I really worked in wood, through high school and in college. I also had a mom who was a hydrologist, so would take me to lots of different local communities thinking about how do we address drought in the American West? How do we sort of fight sort of really big extractive, corporate interests at the community level? So I spent my, youth, at different pueblos, working with different stakeholders and seeing my mom really coordinate those things. So it was kind of instilled with this sense of we should be doing something bigger in this world. We should really be thinking about new ways to actually manage our resources and to support communities. And then I've always been somebody who just loves and cares about teams. So started my first business when I was 7, played soccer really competitively, was always a captain of that, and just deeply believe in when you see a problem, if you can bring people together around it to solve it, that's how you really create impact. So kind of took all of those different threads, worked in the national labs for a bit. I was a backcountry guide and really refined my team building, and then went to Yale Forestry where I was thinking about how do we actually do this at macro scale? How do we, again, understand this problem and then implement this problem in a bigger way? And was working on federal carbon policy and essentially saw, wow, the way we think about reforestation and actually using trees and our resources is something that is really archaic. And a lot of the actual climate work there is really grant funded or public sector funded. And I'm a huge believer that if you're going to create real scale, having an economically viable solution is critical. Started diving on that problem. And, as I think we all know, the entrepreneurial journey is one that is filled with getting things wrong. And when done well, is filled with learning from those errors. So spent a lot of time, really learning. The idea has changed and transformed in a ton of different ways. We ultimately discovered really the problem of urban wood waste and then understood how big the wood waste problem was overall. I started with a sort of $18,000 Kickstarter out of my apartment selling salvaged cutting boards as an initial idea. Now we are building, giant data centers and fulfillment centers for some of the biggest companies in the world. And so it's only been, 4 years since that moment, and it's pretty crazy to see how fast it comes. But a lot of that comes from getting things wrong and then really listening and learning through that.
So was it a natural, like when you started this out, were you thinking using salvaged wood for mass timber, et cetera, for the largest companies in the world? Or were you thinking more along the lines of using salvaged wood to make cool crafts like cutting boards?
Yeah, it was even more disconnected from that. What we started out with was thinking about how do we actually drive improvement in forestry overall. And basically, we had this idea called a tree bond, which is still an interesting idea. Somebody should go run with this. It's not what we settled on. But basically, cities have tree care contracts. They pay people to manage trees in their cities. We were thinking that, okay, cities also want to be planting more trees. They want to be driving and supporting, better forestry and reforestation in and around their communities. Why don't you tie those two things together through a financial mechanism? Can you actually take that tree care contract, have that as consistent cash flow that then can support, the financing and sort of project financing of reforestation? That is so different from a company that builds software and technology for sawmills and sources salvage material for mass timber. But that's where we started. That was the initial starting point. We then got a big grant from the Nature Conservancy to go and understand what was that problem of waste and tree care management in cities. Through that, we then discovered, wow, the volume here it's not niche. Like when I thought of salvaged wood, I thought, a live edge table, like some barnwood in Pennsylvania. It's actually enough volume that you could replace over half of all wood in the US. It's a crazy, crazy volume. So we started to recognize that. We were like, wow, this is a much bigger problem than we thought. And then as we got into it from the public sector, we started to see actually, the city-centric solution is a key puzzle piece, but that's not how you're going to really create scale, because cities can't solve this problem if there's no market demand, and you can't create market demand unless there's supply. And supply is dependent on supply chains, and those supply chains are dependent on connection because this industry is really fragmented. So first problem we are solving is making coherent connected supply chains and then having demand that actually connects that. So it's all a long-winded way to say, no, I had no idea that's where we were going, and are totally surprised by that in many ways.
That's awesome. So are you launching by city? Because so much of it is kind of supply chain driven. Like, do you have to start with hubs?
So that used to be a key part of our model. So early days, we were very city-centric. What we've really learned now is we can be much broader. So we're pretty much covered across the country. We just expanded into Canada. And what does that actually mean? Well, for us, it's a density problem. You need to have the amount of access to trees. You need to have an access to logistics. You need to have the access to milling and then drying and manufacturing, kind of the secondary processing. And you need all of that to have enough different options that you can produce a product that is price competitive, that is consistent, that really meets your end customer needs. So what we do is we really focus on wood sheds. So thinking about wood in a similar way that I grew up thinking about watersheds, where's the water? How does it fit from a landscape perspective? Wood is very similar. You have trees that are going to grow in similar ways within a region. And you also have different processors. There's kind of this puzzle piece of here's sourcing, here's processing, here are the other steps there. So ultimately what we do is we tie all of that together. So we don't really think about that on a city by city level anymore. We think about it on a region by region level, and have really seen pretty much national expansion. And now our next step is to really grow the density within each of those regions.
So Owen, this indirect path to his ultimate solution here sounds familiar to your entrepreneurial journey. I don't know how much you know about Owen, Ben, but he's been dabbling in solar for a long time and has had many attempts, and now he lands in a place like, seems a similar story again as that Owen described. We hear these consistencies on the show. One, like, hey, this seems so obvious. Why didn't someone do it? And there's lots of reasons. And two, this like, man, these journeys are very unique. And when you're in the middle of them, probably don't make much sense until you get to the end, and then you can tie it all together.
Yeah, Ben, I tell people this all the time, like to your point about the analogy you use, like the stones to get across a river. When you're in real time, you've no idea where these things are leading. But in like periods of 3 to 5 year increments, I feel like if you look back, it's so clear how everything is connected. And I'm like, man, if you just knew that go like in real time, it would make decisions so much easier, obviously. But it's cool to look back and be like, oh, this is why that happened, and here's how the next iteration happened. But yeah, it's such a common theme among startups and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ben, on that thread, maybe like if you can just quickly, like advice for the budding young entrepreneurs thinking about starting a climate tech company. We have a lot of guests, a lot of audience that seem to be young people. They reach out a lot and ask us questions. So we try to like bring that out of our guests. And this being one of them, like what advice for successful entrepreneurs like you would you give to yourself or people like you that are thinking about starting a company in this field?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question. I'm going to lean into metaphor here because I find these things to be visually helpful. So I do a lot of trail running, do a lot of ultra running. Did an ultra in Alaska this summer, and a big part of that was actually a lot of river crossings. Right? Is how do you cross the river? And I don't know the last time y'all crossed a river on stones, but there's a few dynamics that I think apply to the entrepreneurial journey here. One is just start. Like oftentimes, if you sit on the bank and you try to map out all of the different ways that you're going to get across the river, you can't do that. Like you can't actually map all of those different connected points. What you need to do is you need to step out, and you have to have the willingness to try and to go from one stone to the next stone. So that's one, jump out there. The second is, when you're actually in the river and you're like just jumped to a stone and you're trying to figure it out, what happens is it's really loud. Like there is a lot of noise. It can be a little scary, especially if you're in pretty big water. It's like, man, if I fall off, I'm getting swept down, whatever it is. But remembering that is just noise. Like the actual jump from one stone to the next stone is something that if you were on flat ground with no risks would feel totally comfortable. But when you are in this sort of perceived dangerous environment, it becomes this thing where you clam up, right? And so again, letting go of that noise and letting go of those pieces. And then, in a more tactical way, like the thing that is most important, then I think that I feel really proud of our team on, and I feel proud of myself. There's so many things that we have gotten wrong in this business, but the thing that we've gotten right is our rate of learning. And that is really defined for me by listening. So we have this core value, core principle of listen first. And what that means is it's like knowing that you don't know everything, like knowing that you are an imperfect being, you're new in a space, you're learning something. And what that means is, great, when you have an idea and you go test it, you don't like look for that to be right, you look for truth. And that's something that I think is really, really important. And as we've changed and meandered and figured our way to where we are in crossing the river, that's what's really, really important. And so for young entrepreneurs, focusing on how do you improve that rate of change is so, so important. So listening better, creating feedback loops for yourself, that's all really, really critical.
I was telling Owen before the show, I was like, you're going to love this guy. And you've said a couple things that really vibe with us. Even that example in the beginning, the framing of 2 out of 10 people that are working on analyzing the problem. And I just love that framing. I'm going to steal that. And I think too, this other message of just taking action, we hear it again and again from the successful entrepreneurs we talk to here. It's like, you got to just start, and it's hard. But that seems to be very consistent. So let's transition now back to Cambium. So again, like when I was working with the company, mass timber wasn't an offering at the time, I believe, right? When we were at Google, we were using more for interior partitions and furniture and really cool stuff. But seems like there's been some wave of growth recently. I know there's a software product. I don't know if that's new or not. I love on the website the tagline where timber meets tech. So tell us what's happened recently with the growth and maybe this foray into mass timber and how the technology works. I know that's a lot, but yeah, let's dive in.
Sure. And I sort of think as we're talking about, again, part of getting to this point is you are learning how to get from one zone to the next zone. And as you start to cross the river, you start to be able to look up in bigger ways. Are able to look backwards and understand what got you here. And then also to start to be able to see forwards, like, oh, this is the path. This is how we could get to real scale. And so something that's happened for us as a company is we're starting to think bigger. Like, my theory of change as a leader of this company has expanded in a significant way because I've seen us be able to deliver with consistency. I've seen our organization mature and have the processes to actually execute. So what that means is our goal in our expansion is really trying to be the first tech-native forestry company that is good for people on the planet. And so that has a core focus on circularity, on reuse. That also starts to expand into sustainably managed forests and delivering value into the value chain overall. So what does that actually look like? We basically do two things really well. We work with end customers and help them source material for a better price, for a better experience, and that's better for the planet. So our whole focus is bringing the next generation of materials like CLT, materials like Inventwood Superwood, which is a sort of metal wood equivalent, thermally modified material. So these next sort of generation of material science in wood to the market at scale, as well as, sort of standard material on lumber and flooring and a lot of other products. So our goal is to really deliver that in a best possible way. The way that, folks have innovated around how is the experience of purchasing wood, there's not a ton of that. And so there's a lot of room to really improve that space. And then the second part of what we really do is we build out and are trying to build out the data layer for forestry. So what that means is there's all of these complex stakeholders. I always use the analogy of, when you've got a, dining room table made out of wood, probably 8 to 10 different businesses touched that material before it ended up in your home. That is a lot of complexity. There's a transaction at every one of those steps. Wood is getting put on a truck and moved. There's a logistics step. And there's a lot of fragmentation in this market where that material goes and could go on a different path. So fundamentally, what we're building out is the supply chain tools to manage the complexity of those 8 to 10 different steps, tie those all together, and then really be able to deliver the highest quality, most sustainable products to our end customers in ways that are, win on price and really win for all of the other aspects that they're looking for. So that's all to say. The scope is continuing to expand. We do mass timber, we do millwork, we do furniture, we do raw lumber. We do a lot of different things now. And that scope is something that will continue to grow as we get bigger.
How do you guys evaluate whether a new product line is a good idea to explore or get into?
Sure. Great question. I have one of the most consistent things I say to our team is don't do good things, which I know we're all here to do good things in the macro context, but it's a little tongue-in-cheek there because it makes it sticky. And what it's a reminder is there are a suite of good things that you could do for your company. What do I mean by a good thing? It's a decision you could make that would add some value for a company. It's a new product that you could add that you think would do well. There's a lot of good things you could do as a company. We are only in the business of doing great things. And what that means is always expecting our team to have a very high bar on adding something new. And the other sort of part of that is inherently our business model is really focused on systems change. We touch a lot of the different stakeholders in order to improve the system overall. That also means that we are constantly managing complexity. And so what we have to do is we earn that complexity through excellent process. And the way we make those decisions is, really rigorously. So, that's a long-winded way to say we have a very high bar on deciding when do we bring something in new. And the way we think about it, just from a business strategy perspective, is we really are demand-led. So we're looking for large customers who are going to want to purchase a material or, sign an offtake agreement or set a very clear market signal that they want to actually access that new supply chain. And then we'll go build that for them. And then once we build a supply chain, we will sell that into other customers as well. But we are very demand-led and think that's one of the biggest opportunities for innovation in the industry is wood operates as a commodity. It just gets put out in the market. It's, really price dependent. You're not actually focused on the end customer. We really focus on the end customer, which allows us to make better supply chain decisions.
It's very cool. And
Yeah.
I'm noticing, Ben, you said win on price seems to be important. you're not using net zero carbon commitments as a driver. And it seems to be another theme that's happening with recent guests. We had a woman named Annalie Tostar on recently. She runs a embodied carbon software. Oh, you're not. You might know her. Okay. And her terminology was like, okay, there was a world where we were focused on this net zero commitment world, and embodied carbon was important for measuring scope 3 emissions. And that's like a business driver. But she's thinking bigger too. Like, we can just make construction better. And so I guess maybe, is this an intentional decision or on the language you're using, or did you always have this vision? Like, look, we're a mission-driven company. There's a sustainability problem to solve here, but we can't scale as a business unless we think broader than just working with companies who also have a mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Annalie's a close friend. I was actually talking to you about
cool.
this like a week ago. So super, super aligned. And one of the biggest things that we talk about, one of the biggest things that we believe as a company is, if you're going to win at scale, you have to deliver better value. And I think that is something that I've always believed. I initially was on the carbon removal team at the World Resources Institute, was very tied into CDR and carbon accounting in the net zero space. I deeply believe in those as mechanisms to create value in this world. I also very intentionally built a business that was not dependent on that. We're on a 4x revenue year. We're growing really, really quickly as a company. And a lot of that is because we focused on delivering value to customers and not leading with climate first as our sort of only core value. And to be clear, we need all of it. I think the big thing in sort of climate change is it's a kitchen sink. We need everybody to be doing the best possible version of what they can do. But I'm a huge believer, and I really see our theory of change being, let's go win the industry. Like, imagine if, the biggest forest products companies in the world were public benefit corporations that were climate first. Like, oh my God, think of what the impact of that could be. And there's going to be a new giant global forest products company. There's the new technology to do it. There are new materials to do it. It is a changing world, and there's real opportunities to beat incumbents. Why not us? And if you can do that and constantly be driving sustainability through it, there's a huge opportunity. So that's all to say, our deep belief here is create value, create local jobs, be people and planet first. And you win and you scale by, actually really improving the customer experience. So that's how we approach it. But that's been true forever. It hasn't really been a change.
Do you ever see any of the incumbents in your industry trying to copycat what you guys are doing? Because this comes up on the podcast a lot too, which is like, why don't the big companies just come up with these strategies? And we don't have a really good answer other than like, they've got a good business model. It's working right now. They're not really that innovative because they don't need to be. I mean, are you seeing the same thing? Or are you seeing people trying to copy what you guys are up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think something we always talk about as a team is, the wood industry is 20 to 30 years behind everything. And so there's a reason.
Sounds like real estate industry.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of our industries that we tackle. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's a reason for that. And that's because a lot of the leadership is, again, run things the way that they've always been run. And there's some real wisdom in that. Like, we work with folks who have been in this industry for ages, and we work in ways that, are super familiar for them. We do handshake deals. We, again, create value through customers. Like, these are folks like my dad. These are folks like my uncle. We spend a lot of time in that space with them, and also deeply believe like there's a new generation, and this is true, for every industry. And there's new technology, and there's really big opportunities. But largely to the core question, Owen, is like, why don't incumbents do this? Why do the big players not address this? One, I don't really think that they're thinking about it. I at least haven't seen evidence that this is the thing that they're thinking about significantly. And two, largely, they are focused in many ways, it seems like, on just holding on to what they have. And that certainly innovation is not a core spirit and ethos of, the wood products industry at a sort of large scale. It's true in pockets. There's amazing, wood entrepreneurs, so many brilliant people in the industry, but the big players don't seem to really be doing that. And again, I think this is one of the biggest opportunities we have, is to pull them forward. And then this is true in our industry, it's true in lots of industries, is what you can really do with startups. And sometimes that's you actually becoming the big new incumbent and changing everything. Sometimes that's you being the catalyst for an incumbent to realize, wow, we could be so much better here, and starting to adopt those things themselves or buying you. Either way, you're pulling the industry, you're pulling the world forward, and that's something that excites me a lot.
So you've alluded to this a few times, but maybe ask the direct question, Ben. You're using terms like "think bigger." Why not us? The market's enormous. Like, what's the next frontier? What's the vision for the future, Cambium?
Sure. Yeah, we want to be the first tech-native forestry company that operates on a global scale and really makes it easy to reuse wood, that provides the data and software solutions that moves material up and down the industry. And then fundamentally, we want to be the place where if you're purchasing material, you do that from us. And we got a lot of work to do to get there. I'm very clear-eyed that there's a big gap between where we are today and where we want to be, but that's where we're going. And we're seeing a lot of traction there. We're very focused in the US today, just expanded into Canada. We want to be driving local sourcing. We want to be focusing on density, as I mentioned earlier. And last thing that is a really big part of it is actually really leveraging AI into our platform. And there's a couple of key ways that really works. The first is by connecting folks in our industry who are going to be largely want to be verbal into a data and software platform. So what I mean by that is our truckers, our millers, folks who are driving a skid steer around, they don't want to be interacting with a screen in order to update information or to actually understand what they're doing. They want to be talking. Like that's what, feels really comfortable for them. That's what AI really unlocks in a big way for us is you can have a conversation and be interacting with the data layer. You can be getting information about where material should be or what the cut should be. You can be inputting information about your bill of lading or scale slip. There's a lot of ways that can really be streamlined. So it creates connection for an industry that's sort of been left out of the software space. And then the second piece is really on optimization. Fundamentally, what we have is a market failure where you have all of this wasted wood because it's an optimization problem, because you don't have the right people to move it, you don't have the right people to process it, you don't have the right people to buy it. We are able to leverage that data in a much bigger way. So that's all to say, Joel. Big goals. We are being very, very focused on take the data layer to the next scale and to be really able to deliver for the customers that we already have that we're growing with.
It's awesome stuff. I love the "why not us" question. I mean, you sound like a former, you are a former athlete, as are Owen and I. That's that kind of mindset. Yep. Why not us? Take it on.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, this has been amazing. We're lucky to have you on the show. You're a company we're going to be rooting for, and we can't wait to celebrate this discussion. But we're going to wrap it up here. And you may know we end our episodes with the same question, and I'm very much looking forward to your answer here. So in a world, in an industry, sustainability, if you call it that, where sometimes we get too focused on the negative outlooks for the future, we try to end our episodes on optimism. So Ben, what gives you hope for the future?
Yeah. I see two things. One is I've never seen anybody do something that they didn't believe they could do. And I think that's a thing we need to come back to more and more is, I've learned this through ultra running in a big way is, same question, like, why not? My co-founder and I, the first time we ran 50 miles, we thought that was the farthest we could ever run. Then we ran 100K, and we ran 100 miles, and we ran 130 miles this summer. And the question is why not? And maintaining that belief is so important. So just to affirm, I think that is a critical thing that we do. To me, the thing that gets me really, really excited is the fact that when you actually get into it, and this is the thing I've been thinking about more and more, it gives me a ton of energy. We know what we need to do. We pretty much know what we need to do. And this, I think, is the push. This is a push for me. This is the mandate for both of you. This is the mandate for us as a movement, is to be more honest about what isn't working. What are the actual barriers? The barrier here is not whether or not we can measure, the amount of carbon going into a building to the nth degree. That's not the barrier to addressing climate change. The barrier is that we've got a system that currently isn't valuing that in the right way. And where does that come from? That comes from, do we have shared information? Do we have a democratic system that is doing that? Do we have shared values as a sort of country or as a cohort in actually, addressing those things? So the thing that gives me hope is I actually think from a technical perspective, we have a lot of clarity on how we should be moving, and there's still things to figure out and debates that are very legitimate on where we should prioritize the resources. But largely, we know where we need to go. And the thing that gives me hope is we've seen society change its values in so many different ways. You look back at the last 200 years, oh my goodness, how much have we changed as a society and what we value and how we spend our time, how we spend our resources, how we actually operate. And so that belief is just the same here. We have the same possibility of doing that for something much bigger. And it's a problem we know how to solve. We just have to go and get people bought in around it. So that gets me really motivated. Plenty of barriers, plenty of systems, plenty of people working against that. But what else are we doing in life if not trying to fight for something much bigger and doing that while we have a smile on our faces along the way?
Yeah, bring it on. Well, we're going to wrap up on that unless you have anything else to add, Owen.
What's the next race, the race calendar?
Oof. I am in planning mode. I've got a couple that are circled and that are making me really scared. So I haven't committed to one yet, but it's coming.
My wife just did the Mammoth 200.
Incredible.
I'm not a trail runner, ultra runner, but I live that life through her, so I'm familiar enough to be dangerous.
That's so impressive. Amazing.
Well, Ben, we're going to wrap it up there. We'd love to have you back in the future as you continue to grow and we follow your journey. But anything you can plug here as we wrap up? Where to find you guys on the website, follow you personally?
Sure.
Plug away.
Yeah. Would love to be supportive. If anybody ever needs any wood, you just let us know. You can find us at cambiumcarbon.com or carbonsmart.com. Either one. I'm on LinkedIn and very active there, so always try to answer DMs and engage with folks there. Super excited to be here and big fans of what y'all are doing.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, thank you, Owen. Thank you to our audience for joining. You can also find Owen and I on LinkedIn, usually actively antagonizing the more talk, more complaining sustainability crowd. You can find this podcast and more great content at lesstalkmoreaction.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to take action to make the world a better place?